This is a question that's very dear to my heart and also to the heart of my co-author, Alison Davis. So let me just explain the secret of what's really happening here. In the past, it's always been the case that entrepreneurs launching companies, in particular technology startups, began with their own money and their friends and family. And almost every startup does begin that way. In the past, 15 and 20 years ago, once the entrepreneur began their business, they would then seek out a venture capitalist. And of course, venture capitalists were people that provided capital to new ventures. And so in the common wisdom, most of us think it still works that way, but it doesn't. Things changed very fundamentally here in the United States about 15 years ago. What began to happen is the very successful venture capitalists, and there are many of those, began to raise larger and larger funds. And as a result, they decided to invest more and more of their money later and later. When the rounds become larger, they can make larger investments into the companies, and they can begin to put more capital to work. If you look at the National Venture Capital Association data from 2016, last year, what you actually discover is of the $69 billion that US venture capitalists invested, overwhelmingly, the vast majority of that went to a small number of established startups. In fact, the US venture capitalists backed a little bit over between 7,000 and 8,000 companies, and most of that money was in the what's known as the mid to late stage investing stages, well beyond the startup phase. So who is giving money to early stage technology startups? The answer is angel investors. Because at the same time as the venture capitalists put $69 billion into 7,500 or 8,000 companies, the US angel investors put close to $25 billion into 71,000 companies. Obviously much less per company and much earlier too. And about 80% of the angel money was in the seed and earlier stages, sort of the formation phases of a company's life. Only $1.5 billion or 3% of the venture capital money went into that same phase. So in summary, here in the US, we see that about 80% of early stage companies are receiving their capital from angel investors. The venture capitalists are providing maybe 15% of the capital, and then a small but growing percentage of the capital is coming from incubator funds and from crowdfunding, which we'll talk about in the book as well as in another video. Now that's the US experience. I know that many of the people watching this video live abroad in other countries, and unfortunately the data is not as readily available about who exactly backs startups in every other country in the world. But based upon our travels, the interviews that we undertook in other countries around the world, we think this story is very consistently true. If you're an entrepreneur, you're going to raise your first money from the people you know, your friends and family, and then you need to find some angel investors, because that's where the vast majority of early stage technology companies get their backing. And a venture capitalist is something that you may aspire to later, but it's very unlikely a venture capitalist will write your first check unless they already know you and they backed you before. So in summary, this is something that is really not well understood around the world. Angels back startups. Venture capitalists, for the most part, provide follow-on financing once the companies have a great deal of momentum and growth.